But the great thing about being able to connect with people from other countries and other markets who have different regulatory systems, Americans get to learn from people in Europe with a different philosophy of their medicinal market.
Cannabis's international crib sheet. Jillian Reddish is the co-founder of the Global Cannabis Network Collective, a group that unites those working in the international cannabis scene with other leading professionals in the space. She tells us more about the importance of relationship building in this thriving but ultimately complex sector.
Hello, Jill. Do you want to just introduce yourself to those that don't know you? Thank you for joining me as well. So, what's your name and where'd you come from?
Yeah, Dave, thanks. It's really great to be here and excited for this conversation. And I'm Jillian Reddish, and I have two titles. Actually, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for the consulting firm Gateway Proven Strategies, also GPS. And I am the co-founder of the Global Cannabis Network Collective, GCNC. And that is a network of international, multinational cannabis and hemp businesses that we work with all over the world. So I keep quite busy these days.
Yeah, and we met at ICBC in Barcelona, which was cool. How have things been for you since you came back? Have it been busy? Was it a good opportunity to kind of meet lots of people that you'd kind of spoken to but not met in person?
Yeah, definitely. And it felt very energizing and really exciting to, aside from anything else, it's exciting for me as an American to be in Europe again. Yeah. I was very excited when I booked that flight because as we know, since the pandemic, it's been so hard to get over there. And so it's been a bit of a challenge to really connect one-on-one and broaden networks with folks in Europe. But of course, the miracles of technology and virtual calls like what we're doing right now.
Absolutely.
You know, it's totally possible. So it was very exciting to meet a lot of people in person. But as always, just to feel that buzz and energy in the room of people connecting and
absolutely
a lot that like business was getting done.
Absolutely. It's like you can facilitate everything remotely if you need to. But yeah, like you say, there's nothing quite like sort of being there in person and meeting people and sort of just being there, which is great. So, yeah, I mean, how long have you been in the cannabis industry? Because you've been in a couple of years before you launched the Global Cannabis Network, didn't you? And tell us a little bit about your history.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined the cannabis industry in 2018. I worked at Marijuana Business Daily, which puts on the largest trade show for cannabis, MJBizCon in Vegas. My last year there, we got over 30,000 attendees, and last year it was pushing 35, I think. So I threw that number out there because I know some people are almost surprised to hear that there's that many people who would want to go to a cannabis conference.
Oh, wow. No, I mean, it's I know it's, I've never been, but hopefully this year or next. But I know it's huge, isn't it? It's a big deal. I mean, not even just in the US or North America, but globally, isn't it?
Yes, very much. It really is a convener of a show all around the world. A lot of people will say, you haven't really been in cannabis until you've attended an MJBizCon. And so there I was just jumping right into the deep end of work, doing marketing for this major trade show. Wow. And so my background is marketing and communications. I have a graduate degree in communications where I very much studied communities and networks and how those form and operate. So it was very interesting for me to be there at MJBizCon and see all of these people together on the show floor. And yes, there's a lot of business that happens on the show floor, but it's also, as we've said, so massive and overwhelming that it's kind of like, well, how do you find who you need to connect with and actually get your business done?
Absolutely.
So I worked there until 2020, and my business partner, Chris Day, and I left and formed a business together. We did some consulting, but really we were focusing on the GCNC, which we formed in 2020. And really the genesis of that was kind of being at these trade shows and realizing, there's always kind of that back room where the deals are really getting done. It's the right decision makers find each other somehow, and that's where the deals happen. It's not so much on the show floor or even in the I want to say classrooms, but where the sessions are.
No, absolutely. But it's, for me, ICBC was my first sort of event for the cannabis. Well, actually, it was my second, but it was the first kind of official kind of event, I guess. And it was interesting to see that, I guess it was always a sense of community there anyway, that a lot of people knew each other or knew of each other. And, you know, I think all the conversations that were happening out the front were kind of, that seemed to be the place to be, whereas the kind of, you know, rightly or wrongly. But again, there was a good mix of that happening as well as the kind of information. But again, I guess with a lot of events, you have, I think the reality is people go for the networking, for the conversations, for the, you know, meeting people, don't they? And it's great that, you know, industry, they want to kind of do the knowledge sharing and the seminars a disservice, but you know, it's all about the networking, isn't it? And that's such a crucial part.
Yeah, so that's really where the value of the GCNC as a network lies. And this is what we've had people come up to us and say, you know, especially after they've attended a different trade show where there's, you know, a handful of GCNC members, and Chris or myself, my co-founder, Chris Day, if we're there, we get to kind of say, okay, we know a lot of the people, here's who, and I understand what your business goals are for this conference. And I know you should for sure be talking to these 3 people. And then I also met these people, and it's, I get to really help network for them. And we trade all of that information back and forth as well. And in fact, that trading of information is kind of a core tenet for the GCNC. We vet our members and we ask people to apply. And the last question on that application is, are you willing to share your knowledge and networks with other GCNC members, with the understanding that that open sharing of information is really the key differentiator? Because as you know, it's always, this is always, who do you know?
Absolutely. I mean, you operate, well, globally, as it's in the name, but where have you got members from right now? And
we definitely have members on every continent where there is a legal cannabis market. So in the UK, in Germany, in Poland, in Australia, and they have operations in Denmark, I believe South Africa, India. India is a really interesting market these days. Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and of course the US and Canada.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, it's across medical, not just kind of recreational markets that you're operating. You're connecting people right across the board. And is it everything from, I guess, I mean, how does it get specific? I mean, people kind of, if you're kind of involved in the cannabis sector in some form, whether it's, you know, sort of CBD wellness products or whether you're talking about, so it's a real mix of different types of companies, you'd say.
All across the supply chain, across cannabis and hemp, with a lot of ancillary organizations as well. So that could be SaaS, you know, software as a service. It could be agriculture tech, a lot of kind of chemistry kind of things, the solvents and solubles and how that happens. Actually, we have a few members in Israel. I unfortunately left out Israel, and they're way ahead of the US in particular in terms of research all across the board, from how do you deliver the cannabis as a medicine to just what does cannabis do in the body? How does it interact and how does it help? And how can we predict too? So there's we've got some pretty amazing researchers as well in our group. It's great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, you started GCNC during the pandemic, didn't you? Did you find that, I mean, was it kind of reaction to, well, we can't meet in person, so let's start a kind of online network? Was it really sort of driven by that initially?
Yeah, and well, it was really driven by the need to connect people, and people will always want to connect in person. But as you said, barring that, we want to connect however we can. So in some ways, it was almost one of those unique pandemic opportunities that people were more willing and comfortable to hop on a video call with people that they didn't really initially know and begin to have those conversations and begin to develop those relationships.
So was that, I can say, was that not really happening at sort of other sort of event organizers, or it hadn't been all that? I know, for example, I've been to some sort of online events, and that was, admittedly during the pandemic. And there's always that kind of, this is great and everything, but again, it's about talking to people or finding that. And I think some software platforms I've noticed when you do online events have that kind of specific functionality to be able to connect people. But again, it kind of has to come from person to person to feel authentic, I think. Would you agree with that?
Well, Well, I think those events very much have a role, and that we really recognize and prioritize. We definitely we have event partnerships. ICBC is now one of our event partners, where we kind of trade some promotion, and they offer some discounted tickets to our members at very basic level. We also kind of will help event planners with some programming and recommend speakers, because we have such expert cannabis leaders across the board in our network. But really, I think those events kind of go broad, and the value of the GCNC is that we go deep. We do. Chris and I, as the co-founders, do an onboarding call with each member for about an hour, and we sit down and understand their goals and what they want to get out of it and how we can help. And we do lots of check-ins. And the small networking groups or events that we do within our own network are really good opportunities for people to get to know each other more one-on-one. And that's where that relationship building and that trust begins to happen. Because this is a membership organization where there's an annual fee, where there's an application, we kind of vet you for your values alignment just as much as they're vetting us. And so what we find really is that there's a lot of alignment, and
I suppose more commitment too.
Yeah.
If you've kind of gone through that process to be like, actually, I'm serious about this. This is something I want to be part of, and I think you tend to get a more sort of committed sort of membership group if you have that sort of set the bar high for, well, it's not just about sort of entry criteria, but just making sure that, there is that alignment, as you were saying, and that there is that commitment.
Right. We really want to work with organizations who are in it for the long term, and who see that vision of a global cannabis industry, and who want to work with others who are like-minded about building something long, sustainable, in a smart way, in a way that's not going to be exploitative of a market, but really engage with communities and lift them up and make this, there's the potential for the cannabis industry can do a lot of amazing good in the world. And I think I feel confident in saying that all of our members buy into that, believe it, and are working towards that every day. Not to say that we're all, altruistic here, but you can make profit while doing good. You can do well by doing good. No,
absolutely. And I think that's just something on LinkedIn the other day. Again, it was about trying to sort of build that sort of change, or that, because it's such a new sort of industry, there's an opportunity to sort of build it right from the get-go. There's no kind of legacy. Well, there is legacy market, obviously, but there's no kind of corporate legacy in the same way that there are, I guess there's room for more diversity from the outset. So let's build that in right now,
Right. We're not necessarily fighting, 100 years of the industrial revolution said that manufacturing has to be this way. There's definitely, we live in the real world. We do have those effects, right? We are not going, just because there's a potential to build this industry in a really, really great way, doesn't mean we're not going to stumble and run into a lot of roadblocks along the way. Like, we're definitely seeing that, especially in the United States. California is a great example. But the great thing about being able to connect with people from other countries and other markets who have different regulatory systems, Americans get to learn from people in Europe with a different philosophy of their medicinal market.
Yes.
It's very different from how we're operating in the States. And in fact, my friends here, and I live in Denver, where everybody's very familiar with marijuana, but my friends who are not
state,
my friends who are not in cannabis will hear me talk about Europe and assume that it's all about Amsterdam and the Netherlands. And I'm like, no, everybody's looking to Germany, what they're doing, and then France and Italy have both established these very important pilot programs, which is a very interesting business opportunity. And, they're taking their time with it. And I think that time element is an important thing, because it helps bring the population along step by step to help destigmatize and really kind of grow that market over time.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is what I was talking to James Smith about on the previous episode, and talking about 4C Labs efforts in the UK, and talking about, growing the kind of UK medical market, because again, it's just legal from medical, but again, not enough people know about that medical cannabis is legal here in Britain. And it's a message I think a lot of people are keen to sort of put out there. But
Mhm.
I mean, well, what's your sort of take on that? Do you know much about the kind of UK market? I mean, sorry to put you on the spot in that respect, but
Yeah, no, I mean, I try to be as familiar as possible with each of the
sort of
markets.
the oracle of global cannabis. That's your new moniker, right?
Yeah, what I find as an American so interesting is, and I kind of touched on this, the different approach to healthcare. And so we're seeing this in Australia and in other European countries too, is that once a state health insurer is convinced and willing to take that kind of risk that cannabis is a medicine and that they will reimburse it and cover it, that gets our entire network of doctors on board and able to easily access or more easily access education. And we've heard across the board, all around the world, from people from our research partners who regularly interface with doctors, that there is an interest and there is a desire, but they have the realities of how do I actually spend the time to get up to date with the research. So any kind of advocacy education effort that can make it very easy for doctors to get that information and feel very confident in prescribing to their patients. Anecdotally, that's what I'm hearing across the board. And that's one of the ways to help with that destigmatization.
Absolutely. I mean, again, that was another thing we're talking about with James, the idea that when it's available on the NHS, I mean, the NHS, I don't know if you know, our National Health Service sort of subsidise a lot of prescriptions. So you pay a flat fee, as long as you sort of under £10 for a prescription. Currently, if you access medical cannabis, you get it through a private doctor. So it can be upwards, £125 or something like that, which is significantly more. And I guess that prices a lot of people out of the market. So until you have that sort of buy-in from the NHS, but again, that's got to come almost from sort of government policy or something like that. And so the kind of narrative has to be changed. And I know that James was talking about his work with the CIC here in Britain, the sort of Cannabis Industry Council, and how that kind of body of people needs to kind of get on board to influence so I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to bringing that awareness and sort of helping draw, even in a sort of legal medical market. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the reason that we see so many countries start off with the medical market first. You got to go step by step, right? So that's a big part of it, I think, is that step-by-step approach. Unfortunately, that means that we have countries like Mexico, Thailand, even Germany, who are ready and have approved going to an adult use recreational market, and then they just get stuck because you do have to have that regulatory system set up first so that you can regulate your businesses and you can tell them what they can and can't do, and they can deliver quality products with consistency.
So is that kind of what's happening in Germany? I mean, again, I've heard that Germany's poised for legalization, but something's holding them up, and that's the issue here. You'd say, to your understanding, what's happening there? They don't have the framework in place to be able to, I won't say police it, but to be able to roll it out effectively.
Yeah. My understanding is that they have approved going adult use, but they have to set up the policies first, and various folks are saying that it's just not top of mind for the legislative bodies, but I mean, legislative bodies run at their own pace of change.
But what do you think the tipping? I mean, again, having seen it sort of happen in Colorado and California and various US states, what has sort of been the tipping point for a lot of states? I mean, is it a kind of domino effect, would you say?
It is a really interesting domino effect in the states because, as you know, each state is going at their own pace. So it was Washington and Colorado with adult use markets first, and before that, it was California with the medicinal market for several years, and then nothing really much happened until Washington and Colorado took that leap. And from my understanding of how the sausage gets made of the legislation and regulation, that initial task of, well, how do we make all of these regulations? This is a lot of paperwork. This is a lot of lawyers. This is a lot of policymakers who have all of these other demands on their time, right? So Washington and Colorado put in that effort first. And then since then, so many of the states that have pushed out regulations for an adult use market don't exactly fully copy and paste, but they're kind of copy and pasting.
Yeah.
You have to have a model to go for to go after first, and you live and learn, and there's reviews and things like that happen. So when New York put out their regulations, it sounded really good on paper because they had the benefit of several years of how Washington, Colorado, and other states have done it. But have they rolled it out as well as they should have on paper? We live in the real world.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So I also like the term legislative sausage as well. I'm going to use that at some point somewhere.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. But no, again, when you work at GCNC, thinking about the different countries, and I guess there must be a lot of knowledge sharing around, this policy works here, would it work in, so what works in Malta, would that work in Mexico? Or, I guess that's for them to kind of decide, or for those sort of agendas. But do you feel like there's a lot of crossover in terms of like, well, we're doing this, you guys should think about doing that too, almost? I mean, maybe not that informally, but again, like you say, if there's a kind of template for success or blueprint.
Right. I mean, there are real people who are writing these legislations and regulations and stuff. So yeah, it does come down to person-to-person knowledge exchange. Colombia is a really great example in so many ways. They're at a fascinating point of change. And I mean, everybody with any kind of passing interest in legalizing and normalizing cannabis should have their eye on Colombia. They have such a fascinating story right now of, as we all know, they used to be synonymous with narcos and drug trafficking. And they have gone through so much change in the past, decade and a half, that now they have kind of taken a step back and said, who else? And I'm actually quoting one of their presidential candidates who spoke at Expo Cannabis last fall. He said, who else has the moral authority out of every country in the world to stand here and say, cannabis can be a force for good, it's medicinal, it has a role in our health and wellness, and we want to lead the way in developing this market and in supplying the world. That was, I believe, Juan Miguel Galan. And he's not the only person now, not the only politician saying that. They have had a medicinal market for a few years. They've been investing in cannabis production. They've recently approved the export of cannabis to other countries around the world. But living here in Colorado, I had the privilege of knowing that a handful of Colombian senators, I believe, last fall came to Colorado and had meetings, not just with the governor of Colorado to discuss the regulations here, but how does your adult recreational market operate? What are the ramifications? What do we need to be thinking of? They met with the governor, they met with some lawyers and some policymakers, some cannabis business owners.
Yeah.
That's such a promising sign, right? And they didn't just send over politicians who are in favor of it. They sent over some people who have serious doubts and reservations about this. And all of the reports I heard said that there was really great conversation and interest and, kind of a realization that the world is not going to end if you have a recreational market.
No, but that's really interesting to think that, again, I guess you think of each state almost in the US is almost like an individual country in its own right. But to think that, knowledge sharing between state to a nation state in the same way is a fascinating thing. And I guess it's that sort of foundation. Is that kind of thing you kind of want to facilitate with what you're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Any time that we can take that opportunity to say, Chris and I for sure do not claim to be the experts of everything, but we know a lot of experts in almost every point of the supply chain, from the research to the end user, medicinal or recreational. So we're all about facilitating those connections wherever possible, because that's how things get done, right? And you never know, there's always an element of serendipity. That's just sort of life, right? Yep. So, we might connect someone and it's like, hey, someone got a landed a really good business deal there, or it turned into something like, look at what happened with these Colombian legislators coming.
Yeah.
We were participants. We did not initiate that or anything. But we were very proud to be supporters and part of that conversation.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I think it's important to have that broad sweep of society or, community as part of that. But let me ask, again, at the risk of asking another awkward question, what are your thoughts on federal legalization in the US? Do you think, again, thinking about that kind of domino effect, what's kind of holding back the states that aren't doing it right now, do you think? I mean,
the states that aren't doing it now in the United States are predominantly have a predominantly conservative legislation.
Okay.
They might.
It's almost as simple as that, do you think?
For the individual states, right? Yes. For the Senate, that's just the absurdity of politics, right? Just recently,
about politics.
Yeah. The U.S. House just passed a bill that would do legal federal cannabis reform for the U.S., but it is almost meaningless because the Senate has to vote and pass. And
what does that actually mean? Maybe you could break it down a little bit, because again, I look at American politics, I look at all politics, and I think. So I'm going to talk about the EU referendum. It's kind of like, well, that was a close call. Should we not do another one? Well, apparently not. Okay. But again, so how does that, in terms of what you're talking about, the recent legislation, what does that kind of mean, and what would happen as a result of it if everything went plain sailing? And where are the kind of blockers?
Well, what does it mean? I mean, who knows? We're just at such a place of political absurdity with it, because all signs are pointing towards federal legalization. There's a majority of support for it across both parties in the U.S. right now. And, as we've seen, the House has managed to get it passed, but the Senate is just an entirely different equation before you even get to whether Biden would actually sign something right now. And I personally think that Biden is being very quiet and mysterious about it, because it's not really relevant until the Senate can do anything. But just because it is so absurd, that's why we really focus on the international markets, because we would rather be working with the countries and the companies and the coalitions who accept the fact that cannabis is medicine, whether the UN, will deschedule it or not. At this point, they'll have to eventually. But that's kind of another thing. Another piece of the pie is that the UN hasn't removed it from Schedule 1 yet. Okay,
and that's again. There's so again. This is, I guess, what makes it interesting, isn't it? There's never a dull day at the office for you, I guess, and or anyone working in cannabis, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But there's so much work to do in the meantime until we reach until that potential is realized, and all of the legislative bodies catch up with the research, because the research is undeniable that cannabis is not harmful, that it is actually good for us. I personally find so much of the research about the endocannabinoid system just fascinating, right? I wasn't taught that in school, so I love it when I can sit down and have a chat with someone about, well, what do you know about the endocannabinoid system? Tell me more. This is very important.
It suddenly makes the whole thing about biology a bit more interesting, and maybe if they taught that in schools back in the day, I don't know. Again, when there's a kind of element that, I think it just underpins the need for education, not necessarily at school level, but just generally in society around, and I guess that has to lead to destigmatization. In the more we know about it, the more information gets put out there. And I guess that just becomes an ongoing effort for everyone involved, doesn't it? And for all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the whole world has dealt with about 100 years of prohibition from this for no good reason other than the abuse of power. And that is slowly changing, and it's very exciting to see that. And we work with and support plenty of advocacy organizations, because we're a business who is operating in this space, and the more that we can all be moving in the same direction, towards advocacy and changing people's minds the better. So we're doing it in our way by creating connections, creating conversation points, and working together with it.
Absolutely. So what's going to next for GCNC? What's your sort of ambitions or aims for the rest of 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, we are in growth mode for sure. It was a very exciting start to 2022, realizing that trade shows and events were going to be coming back. And so we've got a lot on our deck with those, particularly in Europe this year. We'll be attending at least one more ICBC event. We're looking at, green tech in Amsterdam and Cannabis Europa. My business partner, Chris Day, is actually in Malta right
cool.
now.
The Plant Medicine Conference, is that right?
That's right, yeah. Plant Medicine Week, and there's a day or two of cannabis business. Malta just has approved an adult use market, and they're really looking to be a point of an epicenter of trade between Africa, possibly South America, and Europe as well. So very, very interesting things happening on that island.
Absolutely. And it's I remember going there as a kid, sort of, 20 plus years ago, and it was just literally, and had some nice beaches, but it was just a rock in the Mediterranean. And all of a sudden it's kind of like, a center for kind of offshore gambling. And it's like become this funny little vice island almost. I say that with the sense of fondness, but it's really interesting that they're so progressive in a lot of their take on things, which is, again, really encouraging, because again, it's an EU nation, it's which is which the UK sadly is no longer. But again, it's that sort of setting a precedent. We can do it right in Malta. We can make this happen, and it's almost like a sort of training ground for the rest of Europe. And if Germany does it, and then France, Italy, I think Denmark has started a pilot program I was reading about the other day. I mean, again, you kind of take your pick, and there's always a country doing something or other in Europe in some. There seems to be varying. It seems to be a sort of sliding scale of acceptance or whatever. I think I was reading about Luxembourg. You're allowed to grow 4 plants for personal use or something, but that doesn't necessarily legalize it. And I think the whole idea in the Netherlands is actually decriminalized. It's not actually legal in the conventional sense, recreation, as I understand it.
I believe they had their eye on an adult use recreational market, but they might have gone with that mid-step of decriminalization, which Portugal also has done, and has kind of proven to the world that they're more social support system for people separate from cannabis, but people who are dealing with addiction of harder drugs, harder opioids, very addictive substances, unlike cannabis. That providing a social support system there is really life-changing and changes your economy. Which is something I was thinking about with Malta. I love how when you see a country kind of take a step back and look at their economic drivers and realize that cannabis as a commodity that you can trade will be very important, and that can be a source of income for, as you said, they are a rock in the Mediterranean. You can't grow a lot of things there.
I think it's similar to Israel in a lot of ways. I mean, this is why, again, they've been so successful in the sort of textile sector, because other than kind of olives, there's not been a huge amount of industry there. There isn't space for it, or there isn't the climate, or whatever, and again, it's interesting how, these opportunities are sort of seized upon by a lot of nations like that. So it's, but again, it really. And again, they might have the same sort of population size as, say, the UK or Germany. But again, it all has to start somewhere, right? And seeing them do it right, the first time round is like, wow, it's something we can all learn from. Yeah.
In a global market, we all have a role to play. Colombia, India are both markets that are well positioned to grow and supply a lot of cannabis for the world. Malta will be able to have a role in that because of their strategic geographical position and their business savvy. That's great.
Yeah. That's it. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Good stuff. Cool. Any final thoughts? How can are you kind of recruiting for new members right now? And if people are interested and want to find out more about it, where should we direct them right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to have conversations with international and multinational, as I said, cannabis and hemp organizations, ancillary as well, of course. And our website is very simple, gcnc.global. Put that www in there too, right? And yeah, I can be found on LinkedIn as well. Jill Reddish is out there. Always love to have conversations with people and connect. We're definitely looking to continue to grow the membership with people who are, aligned with what we do. It's good times.
Great stuff. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining me. And we'll speak again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. This has been great.